Thursday, and to round off my 50 best albums, I'm going to talk about an album by Carole King called Tapestry. After these 50 albums, I'm going to talk about other albums, but I'm not going to put them in any listings, and you can put them in your number 51, 58, 82, whatever you want. But I've done these first 50 albums because I think they're very important. So my 50th favourite album is Tapestry. Now, why do I love this album? Well, it's the second studio album by American singer-songwriter Carole King. Carole King worked in Tinpanalley in America, did a lot of stuff with Jerry Goffin, was an amazing songwriter. I mean, some of the songs you would know, like You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, all these great songs she wrote. Now, she did this solo album, and it was actually released on Ode Records, produced by Lou Adler, who was also a musician. The lead singles from this album was It's Too Late, I Feel the Earth Move, and these all hit number 1 in the Billboard Hot 100. And Tapestry has been certified 14 times platinum in America. And they reckon it's sold 30 million albums. As a songwriter's album, I think it is absolutely essential to know and learn from. And would I say in its top 50? I think it probably may be a little bit high for me, actually, where I think there's other albums I like just as much, but I think when I'm trying to think of songwriting albums will influence me to get into songwriting and musicianship, I would say this is very high up, and this is why it deserves to be there. Also, I will be honest, I haven't had as many female artists I've wanted to put in the top 50 just to, I don't know, just influences sometimes. So Carole King with this album co-wrote most of the songs on the album. 2 songs were co-written by Tony Stern, It's Too Late and Where You Lead, and King wrote the music and Stern the lyrics. King's ex-husband, Jerry Goffin, co-wrote the lyrics for 3 of the songs, 2 of which had already been hits for other artists, arethafranklin, She Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, and the Shirelles, Will You Love Me Tomorrow. So both of these songs, though they were sung by black acts, they actually were written by a white Jewish lady. So this is what I mean about sometimes songwriting, musicianship doesn't always have to be where you expect it from. A good song is a good song. So anyway, why this album then was asked to be written is she'd written an album called Writer, and it hadn't done that well, hadn't been that commercial, and Carole King had wanted to do solo albums because she did another album with a group which didn't do very well in LA. It's actually really nice, probably not as good as Tapestry, but it's got some great stuff on it. But the person who encouraged Carole King to sing her own songs and also played on Tapestry was a guy called James Taylor. Now, James Taylor, very famous guitarist, brilliant songwriter. Actually, in the end, he ended up years later marrying Carole Simon, but he actually had mental issues as well, so he ended up being out of mental institutions. So as good as a songwriter he had a bit of complicated problems, and drugs didn't help him either. However, James Taylor, by influencing Carole King, actually helped and actually co-wrote actually played on the song, number 1 hit, You've Got a Friend. The album was recorded at A&M Recording Studios with the support of Taylor, Joni Mitchell, and various experienced session musicians. So the session musicians make this great. So they actually were session musicians who liked Carole King and wanted her to do very well. The album was met with widespread critical acclaim, and they felt that the voice, though it wasn't technically as brilliant as some of the female singers that sang the stuff, they liked the intimacy and the creativeness of it. So along with that, it was a shame this album came out because it actually stopped Marvin Gaye winning a load of awards for What's Going On. So it had been selected for Album of the Year. It won the Grammys for Best Female Pop Vocal Performance, Record of the Year for It's Too Late, and Song of the Year. And because of that, it had done so well. So because of that, it was so commercially successful. The album was a big success. It spent 15 consecutive weeks at number 1 in the US. It still holds the record for most consecutive weeks at number 1 by a female solo artist. So when you hear about Beyonce and all these people being so great, Carole King actually has records with a great album. This is where music was well written. And you had to be good because she'd already written these great songs at Tinpanalley. And really, Carole King is not probably the best performer you would imagine, but she's very good at what she does. I'm also going to talk about Joni Mitchell next with an album about her and how probably I think they both would have influenced each other a little bit. But the main thing about the cultural impact is James Taylor did a 1971 recording of You've Got a Friend, and it hit number 1 in the US and number 4 in the UK. And then Barbra Streisand did a 1971 recording, Where You Lead. So a lot of these songs ended up being covered by a lot of people. And Another person this influenced actually was Amy Winehouse. Amy Winehouse used to listen to this album quite a lot, and if you actually listen to a lot of Amy Winehouse, Tori Amos as well, you can hear that Carole King influence. And a lot of the stuff, even though Amy's voice is more jazzy, a lot of the structuring of Amy Winehouse is actually based on Carole King. If you listen to it, you will hear it very evidently. And that's why I prefer Amy Winehouse's Frank album, because I think that is more like Carole King with a jazz voice on it. Whereas I found Back to Black I felt was a bit too production for my liking, but it's still a good album. So anyway, going back to Carole King, with Tapestry, I think it has actually influenced so many different artists, and I think it made people look at female artists in a different way. Because before then, most people thought female artists had to be like these big superstars and big and glamorous, like a Shirley Bassey or Diana Ross. And this was where people then, Carole King was the first person probably outside of the folk movement, because, Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez and people like that, and Mary Hopkins, and then people like that, they were very much more singer-songwriter, strummy, sort of guitar-y. And they didn't play the piano, whereas Carole King really took that to another level. And I think then she influenced other artists like Carly Simon. She influenced a lot of different female artists who then we got to be exposed because they saw that she was successful. So Tapestry, I think, which is a great actual title because it is a tapestry, because it's the idea of all these songs she's ever released or written, and then she's got new songs, and it's kind of like the interweaving of her best songs. And the actual album has a lot of ideas which I think were probably after the divorce from Jerry Goffin, who was probably very influential to her career, but this actual album was when she was doing everything on her own, had to look after children, take some risks, and it just shows that sometimes that risk-taking and also just showing independence made this album great. So, to be honest, anyone who's a female songwriter, wanting to understand the basics of songwriting and getting into that, I'd listen to Tapestry if I were you, because I think it's got some great ideas. The actual vocals they're not too overpowering, they're not too over-dramatic, they just work within the framework of songwriting. And a good song's a good song, hence why this album has sold nearly 30 million copies. It is an album which people can play on a Sunday, they play it in the car, children learn how to play these songs. It's got a lot of influence. So that's to wrap up my top 50. From there on, I'm going to be explaining other albums I like. And I was going to do top 100, but it's actually going to carry on indefinitely. So I'm going to be doing them every so often. And I've got at least another 60, 70 albums to talk about. And some of them are actually stuff I like more recent. So I'll also talk about more recent stuff as well. But most of the stuff will, again, just explain things, why I like songwriting, why it was influenced by it, or what their impact was societal or on the culture. So Tapestry by Carole King, very influential female songwriter.